Welcome to the Over the Hump podcast. Your gateway to the world of the iconic Brahman breed of cattle. At BRC Ranch, our passion for Brahman cattle runs deep. Join us as we delve into the heart of this extraordinary breed, unveiling its rich history, exploring industry trends, and sharing captivating stories that define the American Brahman. BRC Ranch stands as the pinnacle of Brahman excellence in America, boasting a decade-long legacy of champions and housing the finest Brahman bulls worldwide. It's not just about cattle, it's about a legacy that reverberates across ranches and hearts. Brought to you by BRC Ranch, where the Brahman legacy thrives and stories are woven into the very fabric of ranching. This is Over the Hump. And now your hosts, Brendan Cutrer, Rachel Cutrer, and Keaton Dodd.
Welcome to the Over the Hump podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Cutrer, and today I have with me Keaton Dodd of BRC Ranch and Brandon Cutrer, also of BRC Ranch. And for this podcast today, we have the topic of all things DNA. We started out just as DNA discussion. We tossed around the idea of like DNA debacles, some of the problems we've had, and then we settled on all things DNA because what we want to talk about today is just a big overview of why we think DNA is important, how we handle our DNA, and then even go through some of the problems we've experienced and how we fixed them and move forward, with the whole process. So I'd like to kick it over to you, Keaton, if you're good with starting out, just an overview of why we think DNA is important.
Yeah, no, exactly. And this is supposed to be informative, and there will be situations where we talk about positives. We talk about some of the negatives associated with it. But in general, I think we all agree that DNA is a great thing, is an important thing. And why we probably would all agree that DNA is important is a couple of things. First and foremost would be pedigree accuracy. And it's not even from the standpoint of we think people are lying all the time, but it's just easy to let some of those things slip through the cracks, and maybe you end up with a calf registered as something when it's not, and then it goes time to use that performance information, and it's basically rendered completely useless. If you collect weights and all your data, if you don't have pedigree labeled appropriately, then that data is basically, it's unusable, or you're going to get the wrong information. And so I think pedigree accuracy is not only important just from a standpoint of knowing what you're putting into your program, but also, like I said, using that data to help make your EPDs. Then also, I thought that the second part of DNA that we see is pretty important. And if you've been familiar with our Brahman Country genetics program, our genomic evaluation, and the strength that can bring our pedigrees and our numbers. I don't know, Brandon, what do you think? Additions to that?
Yeah, just to add to that, I would say as much work as we put into collecting all the data, and then for the purposes of using it in a mating situation where we're trying to improve cattle on any level, DNA is super important because you were just saying, if the pedigree's not right, you don't match up with the parents, none of the rest of it matters. Mm-hmm. And so all of that work that you put into it is rendered useless, just like you said, but also the matings that you're trying to make informed decisions on to create these matings is rendered useless as well. So it's just super important to make sure you have it from the get-go, the right starting point to know where you're at.
I actually didn't share this before the podcast, but I'm in a group on Facebook called Angus Underground. Are any of y'all on that?
Yep.
Okay. Angus
I listen to their podcast.
Oh, they have an Angus Underground
one.
community. And they had posted a couple weeks ago that Will Chapman had said he was in a master cattleman's class put on by a state university, and the advice they were giving commercial producers. Commercial customers should never buy seed stock based off actual data. It's not accurate and means nothing when selecting a bull. So I thought that was really interesting because we use actual data, but if this is coming from a state university, are they basically saying you need to be that DNA and genomic data is more important than actual data? Sorry, we did not discuss this. I didn't mean to just throw a wrench in y'all's game plan.
Say there's probably contingencies to what he's saying. Well, I think there's probably some validity to what he's saying. There's also some contingency. Actual data by itself may or may not be useful, but actual data within a contemporary group where you'll be able to compare cattle, also taking environment into the situation or into the equation would have something to do with it. And I think all things considered, you got to have the actual data to build a database around.
Well, yeah, your EPDs have to come from something.
That's right. So you can't just look at it face value. You've got to dig a little deeper and figure out some of the other issues involved. Like on this actual data, somebody might have a calf that they just feed as hard as they can and get this super heavy weaning weight or yearling weight, but really that actual data by itself, without being in a contemporary group or without being in the environment that they'll be used, means nothing.
No, that was a pretty good explanation, Brandon.
You sound
like a genius on that. And I agree. The contemporary grouping portion of it is key. Like Brandon said, if these are overinflated cattle or you're just a standalone animal, there's nothing to compare them to, so you can make no adjustment for environment when you're in a situation where it's a single animal without a contemporary groups, obviously. And then if you can't come up with any numbers without any actual data, I mean, you have to have actual data to generate EPDs. So at the end of the day, but I think what they're getting at is there's just quite a bit more strength when you couple that actual data with DNA information, genomic information.
Oh, absolutely.
So say if you were a bull buyer, a commercial bull buyer, and you came to BRC to buy a low birth weight bull, would you have more confidence in us saying, hey, this was a 76-pound birth weight bull, or the birth weight EPD, if it's genomically?
That's a good question. I actually fielded that exact question this weekend from someone that was calling talking about our bulls, and I told him there's not a right answer to that question personally. And I think if you're not looking at both, you're probably not using all the tools available. I don't know, Brandon. I mean, I know that you use actual birth weight figure pretty heavily when deciding what bulls to turn out, who needs to buy what bulls.
But also, I use those, but also keep in mind other factors. Pedigree, EPDs, our genomically enhanced side of things, as well as, full brothers and full sisters. Because, I mean...
But you know all of that.
I know that.
Not every
but
person
at the same
selling
time,
Brahman cattle provides all of that.
I try to tell those customers that too, so that they are able to make the informed decisions that they need, or at least kind of push them into a direction where they need to go.
I guess case study. I'll throw this question that was actually fielded to you, Brandon, and see what your kind of thoughts are. And so this customer, they had come and they had it down between a pair of bulls that they like. One of those bulls is out of our Sartwell breeding program using Sartwell genetics. And so sure enough, low birth weight, backed it up with actual low birth weight. The other bull traces back to kind of more some noble sire lines, but had an even smaller actual birth weight. So they were asking which one of those bulls would I be more confident in turning out? And I think we would probably all have the same answer on which bull we would be more confident in.
Like, should we say it? 1, 2, 3?
Sartwell bull. That's right. Knowing what we know, I would feel more confident, even though he might have had just a hair extra actual birth weight, because of knowing the pedigree information on both bulls and kind of the history of those. I would all day long feel more comfortable going with the heavier actual birth weight bull than the other one in that particular instance.
Because of pedigree.
Because when you figured pedigree into the equation.
And if you looked at those bulls on paper and studied their EPD profile, I would assume the Sartwell bull probably is quite a bit improved on his birth weight figure.
Yeah. I mean, you hear this phrase all the time about how things can like sneak up on you, like in color, I would say. Like, oh, you have these nice colored calves and then 3 generations later you get a red spotted one and you're like, well, where did that come from? And well, it came from this bull 3 generations back, Would you say birth weight is the same way? And I guess my point related to this podcast is that's why the DNA and the genomics are so important, because it takes all of that into consideration.
I would say that could be, and that probably has something to do with it. But also another factor would be environment, the time of year those calves are born in. Take, for example, the calves that are born in March versus the calves that are born in May, because you're coming out of winter. All those cows have had to eat hay and mineral all the way up through the middle, the 1st of March or something. And those calves hit there and they got pretty decent birth weights. Yet about that same time, you're thinking about the May calves, from the last 60 days of that pregnancy, we've got clover and ryegrass and this and that. And those cows are just getting fat and bloomy. And there's that extra environmental nutritional factor going into it as well. So I guess the DNA part of it helps take those factors out, where you're looking at them on a genetic basis and taking out the factors of environment.
Brings us back to like the case of Winona's bull calf in the barn that we've got that we like so much, and he's got lots of strength, old
Melvin.
But he had a little more birth weight. How much of that could be attributed to he was maybe just a little further gestation-wise? How much of that is attributed to his mama went to Houston 2 weeks before he was born on full feed getting pushed, and so those bulls can gain as much as a pound a day in that last trimester. So how much is to be attributed to that? I don't know.
It would be very interesting to see what his genomic EPDs look like for birth weight. That would be really interesting. Okay, so we kind of got off track, but let's talk. We at BRC have been doing DNA for a long time, and I was trying to think about this morning, Brandon, of when we actually got on the DNA train. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember we were at Dallas at the national show, maybe like in 2014 or 2016, and the topic of moving ABBA to genomically enhanced EPDs had came up, like to the board. You remember this? And the board voted it down, that they did not want to move in the direction of providing genomically enhanced EPDs to, our breed at that time. But we were both serving on the board at that time, and we're totally ingrained in BIF and all of that kind of stuff. And even though the breed as a whole voted against it, we thought it was important, which then led to some conversations with Zoetis at that, back in probably 2016, 2017-ish, which then led to us forming a private partnership with Zoetis to take our whole herd and basically create like a in-herd or a within-herd data set where all of our cattle did have the genomic EPDs in a private project. Mm-hmm. I think the first time we officially were able to use those was October 2019. By the time we had collected all the samples and got the data analysis back from them.
Yep, that seems like the right timeline.
Yeah, and so we at BRC have been fully integrated into genomically enhanced EPDs for the last 5 years, and it was a process that it took us a while to get there. And now, Keaton, you handle that completely. I mean, are you looking at that almost every day?
Yeah.
I mean, like
it's at least a topic that comes up in conversation every day.
Yeah, let's kind of talk about our DNA process. I mean, we had this conversation yesterday. I think this is a question a lot of people ask, like, when do we collect DNA? How do we collect it? What do we do with it? When do we send it in? Just kind of so I guess my point of this too is that there are a lot of people that may just be getting into this and don't have a workflow or don't have a process. How can it be easier?
It's a forever changing process. I'll tell you, as it's developed, as partnerships with Zoetis have developed, as ABBA has kind of started shifting into this direction, it's changed. And so right now, I guess, to break down our DNA program as it sits today, first things first is collecting the DNA. And there's multiple ways to get samples. We've dealt with Sartwells through our cooperator program, and they like to send in tissue samples. Here at the ranch, we mostly like to send in blood cards. Just seems to fit with our working. When we're dehorning those cattle or when we're branding, we'll just pull a little blood, put it on a blood card, send it off. And then the other way, hair, we've also used hair samples before in the past. And so all three of those are methods that work well. We'll tell you, we've had no issues with the blood. We've had a few hair samples get rejected and sent back to us. And so they tell me that if you want just the most confident that it's going to make a sample that's usable, that it's the tissue samples, but that's, I don't know.
Which would be the ear tag?
It'd be an ear punch, yeah.
So for people who are doing that, they're usually doing it at birth?
You could do it, yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So that's one way of making sure they all get it done, because sometimes they can slip through the cracks, but if every time that's when they
can't catch the calf.
Yes.
Right?
But I guess that's a good point. That's the one time you wouldn't be able to get it. But yeah, so at the moment that they're born and you ear tag, you've got that DNA tissue sample in a little vial that you can send off, and it's got a barcode attached to it already. But so So let me stop you there. Why don't we do that? We've talked about it. Honestly, it's
Just
something that may happen in the future.
Haven't yet. I think there is the equipment used now that as you tag, you can do the tag and the sample all in the same hole punch. And that's always been my concern is that I don't want multiple hole punches.
Valid
So,
response.
I can't stand that. And you remember as a kid where you catch a little animal or something and you put it in the shoebox and you punch holes in the top?
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
want that animal walking at me looking like that box top.
Right.
So,
we typically do it at dehorning.
Mhm.
And this is going to sound really crazy because you're saying it's a blood sample, but I just want to clarify, it's not the blood from the dehorning.
no.
Right?
Pull it from under their tail.
It's a separate process
Yeah.
that you use.
Yeah, so at dehorning, everybody's got their own job.
So we just do it at dehorning because we've got them in the chute.
Yes.
At that
Basically,
time.
and it's a good age. And so what we'll do, obviously, we'll put that blood on a blood card. And one of us, whether it's me or Brandon or Harley, will be pulling blood and working those blood cards while everybody's doing kind of other stuff. And so we gather all those samples, typically like to get a group together just because if you're going to pay postage and go through the time to mail something, you want to have like a sizable group. So say we'll work the whole set of maize tomorrow and we'll collect that off all the maize. And we will immediately that next day, I usually bring it to the office. Miss Lynn has the Zoetis still pulled up. She sends it in the mail. And that same day, we'll go ahead and if you haven't set up a portal through Zoetis, this is the easiest way we've found is to go through mysearchpoint.com. I believe that's what the website is, but it's Zoetis' portal for allowing the electronic submission of the DNA information. So you'll go punch in the barcode, that animal's brand number or permanent ID. We use brand number. And then you can punch in projected sire and projected dam and send it off. And so as soon as those barcodes match up with some of the samples that come in through the mail, they'll process them all. So it's automatically attached to your account. And it has the date it was submitted, the expected date of completion. And the best part is when you plug in that this is a sample that needs to be kind of sent to the American Brahman Breeders Association, they'll automatically CC them on all the information. So when you get an email like sample submitted, that gets CC'd to the Brahman Association. Sample complete, that gets CC'd to the Brahman Association. We're going to mail you kind of the results. That CC's me and the Brahman Association, so we're all on the same page. I know when it's done. I know when the ABBA at least has received it. So there's just kind of a paper trail that goes along with it. It's a very, very easy process. You could do it. You could do 50 head in 10 minutes. It's a very, very easy process.
It's sure gotten a lot better over time with the streamlining it and the communication between all the entities involved.
And we work on it. I mean, still to this day, we're working, and I'll have a phone call with Zoetis maybe once or twice a month, and we'll just talk about ways that we can make it better, ways that they can make it faster. And they've been good at trying their best to just kind of keep things flowing.
Yeah. But back to collection, when we collect it, that might not work for everybody but it just happens to work for us in the way that we do it. Because at dehorning, we generally dehorn about 3.5 to 4 months old. And so by collecting those samples then and turning them in, that still buys us a little time until we get ready to register those calves. Because of the age that we're collecting, we probably start registering between 6 and 8 months old, especially to stay in that registration charge of $17.50 versus after that 9-month mark, it bumps you up to an extra few dollars per head. And so, and that can mean a lot of difference of money for somebody who, depending on the numbers that they have cattle that they're registering and processing. So just to kind of get it fit in, because it does take a little time for everything to process, you're usually looking at about 6 to 8 weeks for processing. So that kind of fits our window of the processes that we do to get a calf registered.
And that's one thing I would challenge everybody or suggest is give yourself enough time. Everybody's frantically, we haven't got our DNA, we're trying to register our calves. If you'd allotted maybe 8 weeks and we're safe about it, you'll be all right.
Give yourself time,
exactly.
Zoetis time, ABBA time.
There's a lot of science that goes into this. This isn't a snap of the fingers
True.
process that people think about like, hey, could you rush this and get this done in a week? Well, they can't even process. I mean, even if they started at the moment you asked, they couldn't get it done in a week. And so just things to keep in mind. One thing that just popped into my head, and it's not on this list, I know we've got to keep moving, but do you just pull DNA on the cattle that you think are good enough to register?
No, I do it on everything.
Exactly.
Or I say we, because
yeah,
I think
exactly.
half the time you're the one pulling the blood.
But the reason I ask that is there's a lot of people that like, y'all even do the steers? Like,
Yep.
absolutely we do the steers. We want to know information on the ones that work, and we want to know information on the ones that don't going forward. And so that just hit me while we were talking.
But, I mean, there's several reasons to that. One, you build a better database.
Yeah,
and you're comparing genetics that do better or in a certain area, whether they be good or they be bad. But the bad make the good look better. You know, it helps your averages. It establishes an average, and then you can find the cattle that will ratio or rank higher than the average. Because if you're only doing all the air quotes good cattle, you're not getting a true picture. And so you got to do everything.
Yeah, exactly. We're 100%.
Yeah,
the steers,
everything.
The ones that are going to go to the sale barn because they're too crazy or whatever it might be. We need that information.
That's why I still collect birth weights on stillborn calves.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
It's still information.
Just to have it,
Okay, so you said, Keaton, when you go into Zoetis, you put in what you think is the sire and dam.
You can.
Is there an option where you could say, I don't know, and they could tell you?
The technology is getting to that point.
And there's a spot where you can put alternate sire or potential alternate sire.
It's getting better and better. I see it, and don't quote me. Like I said, I have familiarity with this, but I am in no way a doctor. But from my understanding is it's going to get to the point very soon where you don't even have to do it. It'll automatically, you just send it in and that's a captain out of 694/7, and we know it because you had DNA information submitted on both of their sire and dam.
That would be amazing.
But you got to make sure obviously everything's DNA'd, or that's a technology that is not functional.
Okay, so let's move into the question of what do you do when you get a mismatch? You know, say you submit who you think it is, Captain times Sweetie, and then it comes back not that. What do you do then? If
that's the actual sire is also on file, there's a good chance that you'll get that information directly from them. Like I said, this technology is improving. It's getting to the point where on this search point protocol, you don't even have to submit sire and they will run it but basically you need to have a list of what the alternative options could be, and that makes their job a lot easier too versus running it in comparison to exactly. You can shrink the amount of time it takes and even the accuracy when you say like, okay, well, we think it's this AI sire, but it could also be this cleanup bull that was turned out this day, right? There's only so many options it can be, barring you bred with the wrong straw semen at AI. But if you know what bull was cleaning up, you know who you AI'd to, it's pretty easy to get there.
Yeah, I just picture like this screen on my head, like scanning all these codes and numbers and everything like that. And if you're scanning like, hey, here's the codes of 3 bulls versus here's 1 million bulls, that would be a lot easier. When we submit data, how many of them have something that seems to be a problem?
5% maybe, Brandon. You think that's a fair assumption? Yeah. It's not a bunch.
But and you would think, even with our record keeping, as diligent as we are, keeping everything together, there's still easily mistakes that can occur.
Gestation length can completely throw you off.
Yeah.
Right? One's 7 days long, and so you think it's out of the cleanup bull, and it was actually an AI calf that was born late.
Completely unintentional. It happens a lot. Just like you mentioned, a cleanup bull mistake. We might be jumping ahead right here, but a perfect example of that is the Geronimo's Cadillac 230 bull that we had. That cow calved within 3 days, either side.
He was a natural calf.
He was a natural calf from an AI, or I'll get to that. What we thought was an AI, because he calved within 3 days, one way or the other. He was right at the expected calving date of 291 days of the AI.
It has to be late, probably 3 days after that.
That could have been right, but I remember it was within 3 days, and so I automatically wrote him down as AI.
Which anybody was peanut. It was a peanut.
Yeah,
we thought
it was peanut.
And he was a moderate birth weight bull, and bulls normally come later and all that kind of stuff. So that's definitely an AI. 100% confident in my head.
At least all the clues
based on my records, everything. I was 100% confident that bull was sired by peanut. As time went on and this calf started growing, I'm like, that don't look like a peanut. He looks awful like.
Well, I would say color was one of the factors at first, because peanut is
color
darker
and body
color,
and head
body
shape,
sheep
like,
design.
as the calf got older, I just got a stronger suspicion that wasn't right. And so it just so happened that the cleanup bull that we used was Raider.
But you should say Raider will jump 13 fences to get to a cow.
Well, breed of cow.
He will move.
But that bull wasn't turned out till 3.5 weeks after the AI date. And so I was like, there's no possible way that it's that bull. But upon some collecting DNA and sending it in, we found out that it was actually
just born 3 weeks early.
Born 3.5 weeks early. So that is an easy mistake. And he looked like a Raider. That's an easy mistake. But all clues indicated that he would have been what we thought, but we were wrong.
Brahman beef is the next big thing in the meat industry. Known for its great flavor along with heart-healthy benefits, Brahman beef is taking the country by storm. Brahman Country Beef features great-tasting, heart-healthy beef raised by BRC Ranch. We ship nationwide, with everything from premium steaks to briskets, ground beef, and even hard-to-find cuts like tri-tip, picanha, oxtails, and the elusive Brahman hump. Visit BrahmanCountryBeef.com and start your order today.
So I think that's an interesting one because everybody knows the bull 230. He's been our top AI seller for the last 2 quarters. I mean, people around the world love that bull. And I believe when he won calf champion at Houston, his pedigree said, like on the Brahman Journal, that he was a peanut calf. Because at that point, y'all had collected the DNA and we're still waiting, the results. And then I believe it was after Houston, we had to change the pedigree, correct it. So there's a couple of, I feel like Katie Couric here as like a reporter, but there's a couple of things I want to point out because number one, we did change the pedigree to be accurate.
Exactly.
It's perfectly acceptable and you should
preferred.
You should change the pedigrees so that they are accurate. But going back to him winning calf champion bull at Houston, or was he reserve?
He was calf
champion. Okay. And listed as a peanut calf at that time, the show points, air quotes, would be going to peanut. And I think that that's kind of worth mentioning because not that you're accusing people of anything, and I'm not going to get ugly here, but my point is correct pedigrees can affect multiple layers.
That's
of
right.
things.
Well, I mean, just in that example there, it was show points.
Yes, it would be show points for peanut.
So I remember after we found out, got the right data back, got the pedigree corrected, had a conversation with ABBA to make sure everything else changed as well.
Everything else was corrected down the line.
Show points, but also EPDs, because just the EPD profile between the 2 matings, the only thing you're changing in the sire was big. And so...
And also marketability of a sire, because at that time, that would have been Peanut's first calf crop. And we all love Peanut. And we were like, yeah, Peanut sired the calf champion bull at Houston, and we have a partner on Peanut, Cheryl, and she was excited. And then you find out, well, that's not exactly right. It affects many layers of this purebred game.
On Peanut.
Thinking,
because they saw that calf and they thought it was a peanut. By no means did we do that on purpose, and that's the importance of making sure you have this. Is if you want to have integrity, it helps. Yeah, exactly.
Keep it accurate.
Yeah.
Keep things accurate.
Super important on a lot of levels.
Many levels. I'm like, what? Not again to go down the rabbit hole, but what if we were, what if someone was trying to make their bull be like top AI sire by having a lot of progeny and like they're not DNA? Can they just make it up? Well, I mean, they can just say, oh, like, my bull, Billy Boy Blue, he had 100 calves this year, but he really didn't because it's not DNA verified or parent verified.
I know of 2 instances in other breeds prior to DNA technology where some breeders in other breeds were trying to do just what you're talking about, build their numbers up and make bulls look better on their EPD profiles. And they created an entire fake cow herd and just, like playing a video game, turned in information to their associations to build their bulls up in these certain areas so they could say, hey, man, I've got the high weaning weight bull of the breed. I've got the high this of the breed and high that of the breed. And after a little investigation, it turns out there was an entire herd in 2 different instances of cattle that never even existed. Just
that game we all played in animal science class. Did you play it at A&M? Did you play it?
I had the EPD
it was like the EPD game
I love that
on the old computer that you could. We should try to find that game.
I had a copy
and
of it.
compete against each other.
Miss Tina Dickens has it. We'll have to get her. I mean, but it was way back
like
on
a DOS
Yeah,
computer
it was-
floppy disk.
Yeah, I don't even know if we would
game.
So
be able
she
to plug it
may
in.
not have it. That was 25 years ago.
That's a good point, Brandon, though, that you brought up that most people don't even think about. And that probably the average person that doesn't even go through their mind of manipulating EPDs using animals that don't exist. Because, I mean, who even thinks that unethical?
Evil.
But there's
Yeah.
people that exists out there that, I mean, and
But
they can change things.
Yeah.
I mean, you can ruin another bull's EPDs if you wanted to make up
I
fake
never even thought about
fake
that.
bulls, but you could drive down your enemies. You could make fake contemporary groups
Oh my
say
gosh,
that-
you
that-
totally could.
make all of these terrible animals that have no performance be sired by your enemy's
competitor, yeah.
bull, and then you could drive down his EPDs with animals that never even exist.
Yeah.
There's
But
some
DNA
evil that could go on
But
that way.
DNA
Without
gets
DNA,
around
Yeah,
it.
right.
Yeah, DNA saves you. from
DNA
that.
prevents all of that.
Because you have to have an actual animal to get the DNA from.
So let me ask you that again. I hate to get all into conspiracy theories, but there is a trend in ABBA that if you would like to serve on the board of directors, which is elected by a popular vote, you can just buy memberships, and you could buy 100 memberships and then you vote for yourself 100 times and now you're on the board. And a few years ago, they made the rule that you have to register 3 head to be a member, I think, something like that. But if we're not, as a breed, we're not requiring DNA, people could still make up 3 heads.
100%.
I mean,
They've done it. I bet.
they do. They can and they do. But if our breed were to move to, like, say, 100% DNA requirements, which I don't even know if that's a thing or not, you can do that. But would that ultimately solve that problem of people making fake memberships, fake cattle, fake EPDs? Because you can't fake a DNA, right? Like,
No.
you have to have a unique DNA sample.
Exactly. If
Even
you turned
like-
in one,
Yeah, you could, even if you said, okay, I'm going to punch this calf's ear once, and then I'm going to send in a blood sample, and I'm going to pull tail hair on him and send in 3 different
then they'll
samples,
say this is
they would catch you.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
No, that's a fantastic example because I'll show you how good they are at catching this stuff. We sent in some information on 2 sets of twins, and the DNA was able to pick up that they were twins and red flag them and said either this is a repeat sample or are these twins ?
Wait, back up, because that's like blowing my mind. So
So-
you knew they were twins.
I did, but I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't note it.
Okay,
just
okay.
writing down that they were twins slipped completely past me. I didn't think
Mhm.
about the fact that their DNA would come back the same if they're identical twins or whatever. But they emailed me privately, like, "Hey, did you accidentally send in duplicate samples, or is there possibility that these are twins?" And I said, "Oh well, no. They actually." I looked it back, and it was Lexi and Laney, 314 and 315, and another set of twins. And I'm like, "Wow." Yeah, those were both sets of twins, and they picked it up
And
without
they
me
detected
indicating.
it.
Yeah, they detected it.
I mean, so that to me is one of the huge reasons why we support DNA so much, because we are accurate people. We have integrity, and you want that. Every seed stock breeder should want that. The highest level of integrity we can offer.
Not only for your customers, but for your own mating decision purposes. If you're going down the wrong road the whole time and didn't know it because your pedigrees were wrong.
Yeah. If you're making mating decisions off false information, you're probably setting yourself back a whole
Right.
lot further.
I do have to share this funny story about, this was when we had the mismatch. I think it was before you came, Keaton, and they gave us a list of possible bulls that it could be, and
Yeah.
it was hilarious. So you need to share that story, Brandon.
I know we'd sent in DNA on something, and they flagged it.
Was
and
it a
said,
calf we had bought from somebody else?
No, I think it was one we raised.
Okay.
And we sent off the information. In this particular calf, we did not have, I mean, this was several years ago before everything was, we had DNA
Yeah, this
on
was 10
file.
years ago, I would
Yeah.
say.
And so they sent back and said, okay, we can't sire verify this. It matches to the mother, but we can't sire identify it. So I went back in my record. Sure enough, the sire that we had down had not been DNA'd. And so we needed to check that out. But they sent us, but I can't remember.
They sent you a list of possible ideas that it could be
Yeah.
to help you try to see if any of
It
these
might have been
clicked,
like the sire had died and we couldn't collect a DNA sample or something. So we had to, I was like, this is what it is, I know. But at the time, I think they were requiring DNA for show. So we had to figure all this out. And they said, well, run it against our entire database. that we had. They said, okay, nothing comes up. I'm like, okay. Well, I said, well, run it against the entire database that you have. And they're like, okay, we have some possible bulls that it could be. I'm like, okay. And they sent me this list. And it was the most off-the-wall list you could ever imagine. They had 4 bulls on the list that it could be sired by. One was like a national champion J.D. Hudgens bull. And I was like,
yep,
that'd be cool.
It.
That'd be a cool one.
That's the one.
That's the one.
One would be a bull that was not even breeding age yet. And 2 others were red Indu gear type bulls from 1977 or something like that. And I'm like, that's not going to work. So we had to figure, I think we ended up coming across maybe an old straw semen from the bull that the calf was sired by, sent it in, and finally got it straight. But that was a big ordeal. But like I said, that was years ago when things were
better.
very primitive as compared to what they are now. Now it's getting pretty streamlined and pretty easy and accurate.
And remind me again, I thought of another one that was a situation where DNA might have helped, because there was a time about 5 or 6 years ago where we bought an animal from another breeder, and then they contacted us a few years later saying that they had accidentally double branded 2 calves with the same number, and now they had one in their herd, but they sold one to us, but they had the same brand or something like that, and we were able to use DNA to
I remember the call from them, and I happened to be sitting out in the pasture when I got the call and looking at the animal, and they called and said, "Hey, we have down that we sold you this cow such and such, brand number this," and I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, we also have down that cow was shipped to XYZ country, somewhere way off." And I'm like, I'm sitting here looking at it, and she's sitting right here. I'm looking at her, and that's her brand number. And they're like, "That's exactly what the other person told me too." And I was like, "Okay." And they're like, "So now we're trying to match the right." Evidently, we have branded the 2 animals with the same brand number.
Could happen. It could happen.
Easily.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, especially if you're dealing with big numbers or something like that. And they're like, okay, well now, problem is it's 2 complete different pedigrees. So would you mind pulling a DNA sample on that cow? I'm going to have the other people do the same thing, and we'll send it back in and figure out who is who. I was like, yeah, no problem. So we did that, and it would have been an easy fix because they were really 1 number off in their record keeping. It was like one was 50 and one was 51. So you could have turned the 0, if you had to fix it, turn the 0 into a 1, or turn the 1 into a 0, or put some kind of And I was like, great, now I'm going to have a jacked up brand on my cow if it doesn't come out right. But turns out I had
we bought the right one.
We bought the right one. But that's a problem that was prevented.
Fixed.
Fixed.
It's a great example of responsible seed stock sellers.
And they handled it
They handled it well. They, as the seller, wanted to verify that the animal we thought we bought was what it was.
Yeah, exactly. They did the right thing.
It's a great example of honesty in selling, because they could have easily said, "Oh, well, that one shipped to,
who cares,
wherever, and nobody will ever know." But people, and maybe nobody would have ever known, honestly, because that animal is in natural production. Maybe we would have never known, but it's just the matter of doing the right thing. Yeah, it's a great story. Keaton, you might be familiar with this. I don't know, but I heard recently about a case a long time ago about a Hereford bull named Perfection.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was before your time.
It was well before my time, but it is a story I'm familiar with, and I don't know the details completely. But this bull, I think he comes out of Kentucky. But the gist of pedigree and accuracy is in the frame race of people trying to make cattle big, people trying to make these Herefords taller, hip height more.
Maybe like the 70s or 80s?
70s or 80s, I believe, is when this would have been. And they say he was a quarter red Holstein, I guess is the gist of what it was. And those calves out of those red Holsteins on Herefords, at least in the first generation, came out most of the time pretty clean Hereford mark, red baldies. And then if you upgraded them even one click further, you pretty much got all of you may get a little bit of a loud marked Hereford, but most of them came out looking like Herefords. And so, yes, that is 100% the case. And I know that there were some lawsuits that came from this. Don't know the extent of it. And I don't know if they ever got the real answer.
I Googled it the other day just for fun after I heard of it. So if you like this sort of stuff, Google Hereford Bull Perfection.
You'll find an article.
I think you can read the lawsuit, which brings me to this other thing is that through the years, you've always heard these conspiracy theories about certain bulls are not truly sired by the bulls that their pedigree says. I mean, I wouldn't say recently, but back like a long time ago, maybe people bringing in bulls from Mexico or wherever.
Or that there's part key in some of these Romanolas or whatever.
Yeah. Again, wouldn't DNA kind of solve all that or put that to bed?
100%.
Could you go back, like if I'm thinking of like a prominent bull? Okay, I'm just going to go down this rabbit hole. Say there's a prominent bull in the 80s before all of this existed that people speculated was not really the sire or dam that they were. If you had a straw of semen on that bull now, could you prove it? Not really, because their parents are not on file?
If the parents aren't on file, you're not going to prove that he's out of such and such or not out of such and such, but you can look at wait, that's not a purebred Brahmin. Or you could go in there and you could see that.
Okay. Or let's say if you got, again, Noble's pedigree is correct, but let's just use it for an easy example. If people were saying Noble was not correct, but then we got a sample of Noble, like a straw of semen on Noble, and then progeny that are supposedly by Noble, could they use that to determine if that bull really pedigree was correct or not?
But I know, because, for example, I tried to buy a Hereford cow that didn't have DNA, and her mother was dead, and her sire was dead, but there was 4 full sisters, and they were able to generate, and I don't know exactly how it works, but they were able to generate a profile to ultimately get that cow registered through.
You got to start
4 full
somewhere,
sisters.
basically.
Yeah.
You got to start somewhere.
I remember on this same line of talking about prominent bulls that could be or not be out of what they say they are is, a good example. I used to love sitting. It's pretty well common knowledge now that back during the feature years, there were maybe some bulls that were smuggled in out of Brazil and used because they had an extra roll to their head. They had an extra turn to their ear, or their horn shape, or something, particularly in the red Brahmins.
Yeah, these are old red Brahmins.
And for feature, hump, speckles, all this kind of stuff.
Twisted ears.
Yeah. So there was a big push for that, but for those guys to get at the top, the best featured cattle would have probably came out of Brazil. So they were, I'd sit down with several of these old guys, and a lot of them are gone from us now, and they were great guys.
Don't say any names.
I'm not saying any names. But I'd sit down at dinner and just I'm like, hey, just between us, tell me about this. And he's like, oh, okay, yeah. Or asking him about certain bulls during that era that they might have been involved with. And they're like, oh, yeah, those bulls were cool, and they did the job we were expecting them to. And they're like, but they wasn't out of what they were reported to be out of. They were signed.
But them boys knew it.
Yeah, they were signed by those Brazilian bulls. And I was like, oh, okay. And and some of those bulls named were probably in the top 20 most widely used red Brahmin bulls of all time for registrations. So because those pedigrees were not right, it affected everybody.
Especially the little 9-year-old Mississippi breeder who's breeding a red Brahmin bull.
I know. I'm like, well, how can I make the right decision? But listen, those guys, it was almost like you listened to an episode of Narcos. Some of the things that they did, waiting at midnight in some East Texas remote runway, waiting for an airplane, a private plane,
parachute down a semen tank or something.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. So, it's very interesting. I wish somebody would write a book, but I don't know.
Isn't that book called Cowboy Mafia?
Well, that's about
horses.
No, that was about drugs, but it was
and horses. I think.
I thought they were laundering money through horses, right?
Yeah.
Cutting horses.
Oh yeah, cutting
horses.
It's
a good book.
It's a really good book. I love that book.
Well, it reminds me of the stories I had heard from older breeders too, back before DNA, is that when you would have like a pen of heifers for sale and a group of international breeders would come in and ask what the pedigree, and basically the seller would be like, well, what do you want the pedigree to be? Do you want 100 heifers sired by bull 123? Okay, because there was no way to really prove it.
Yeah, that or before they got there on the phone call, they were like, I'm really interested in heifers sired by this bull. We're like, oh yeah, we got a ton of those. So they just fill up a pen.
Almost all of them, actually.
Yeah. And so
And every breed
You
has
know it
stories
was
like
happening.
this. Yeah.
You know, like, that's the thing. Oh, yeah, actually, I've got 100 heifers by that bull.
I mean, that's the old steer jock sentiment. How many heat waves in the world weren't heat waves?
I love heat wave.
Heat waves is the most influential club calf bull of all time, probably. But
So I guess another thing, we can go on this, but a sentiment I've heard a lot. I want to talk about the difference between parent verification and what's the term? Genomics?
yeah, genomic
50K?
DNA. Yeah, 50K is a good way.
Is there more than 50K? I mean, I don't
Yes.
even know where we're at right now.
Angus is blown past 50K. A lot of breeds have, but where we're at, ABBA, I believe, is on a 50K snip chip. The gist of it is no, they're not the same at all. The same
Parent
DNA,
verification
the
versus
same DNA
okay.
that you can send in can get both, though. You can do both with the same sample. But parent verification, all that does is verifies pedigree. So it's going to tell
And
you who's that.
Yeah, that's the first step of the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, because you can't
Okay.
get genomic information if you don't know their pedigree.
Okay, perfect.
If their pedigree is
Yeah,
wrong, then the genomics, obviously, you can't link those markers to phenotype or phenotypic data to ultimately generate a genomic EPD. So they're not related at all, but they're both kind of work in unison together. But so the pedigree information would be the verification. That's all it's figuring out. The genomics, they're running, like I talked about, and it's hard to put in lame terms to where everybody could understand it, but I'll try. So they've got that SNP chip where they're going to run these particular markers, 50K of them, in comparison to other animals' 50Ks, and basically they're using those markers coupled with all of the data that we turn in coming up with a stronger number. And I guess the reason I think I see the most value in genomic information is, for example, let's say you are turning out a virgin bull that has never had any genomic information done, and I'm turning out a virgin bull after running him through genomic information. And like the Angus Association, for instance, they'll tell you that the accuracy of that bull's EPD that's got genomic kind of enhancement would be the same as a bull who sired 16 calves already. So you can turn out a virgin bull with the same level of confidence as someone would turn out a bull that's already sired 16 calves. What do you think about that, Brandon? I mean, that kind of rambled there.
I know. I would say you touched on this, that it all works together. The actual phenotypes that you collect coupled with the DNA, because it's almost like a chicken and an egg situation. Which comes first? You can't really have one without the other type thing, because to build the database and find the genetic markers that you need, you have to have the data to base it off of. And so it all works together. So while you could generate, in theory, a set of genomically enhanced EPDs on an animal that never had any phenotypic data, you still need to collect as much as you possibly can to keep building the accuracy of the entire database. The more accurate data you put in, the more accurate data comes out.
So when you say phenotypes,
Birth weights, wean weights, yearling weights.
When we first started getting into that, that was a term that confused me, because I always thought, well, it's the way an animal looks, but it really could be any data.
Physical characteristics is what. So weight is a physical characteristic. Mm-hmm. So yeah, phenotype would be anything that
you can see and measure. And if you had to estimate now, how many phenotypes, air quotes, are you collecting? Because I think every person thinks, oh, well, birth weight and weaning weight, that's 2. And maybe yearling weight is 3. But, I mean, I know what's in our digital branding book, and you've got birth weight, weaning weight, yearling weight, ultrasound data. You've got scrotal circumference on bulls. You've got hip height.
Disposition.
You've got gestation length.
Teat and udder scores on dams, mothering scores.
Taking pelvic areas before. I mean, there's a lot to it.
These are all individual traits that at some point, if you were like the Angus has their foot EPDs, that came from this type of data. People on their ranch scoring the feet of an animal, turning it into the Angus Association, and they match it all up.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's exactly
anything that you can measure and record. If you get enough data,
you can make an EPD.
You can make an EPD, and there's so many. I mean, I'm no geneticist or DNA person, but there's so many different pieces of a DNA sequence that there is some kind of DNA marker that's going to match up to that. And so at some point, you're going to have DNA and I think there already is in like Angus, but DNA markers for feet and udder quality and
Do
all
they
of
have
that
an
kind
udder
of stuff.
quality EPD?
Oh yeah, they got
Uh-huh.
a teat and an udder suspension.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
so does Hereford too. We use it. We use it a lot, like selecting
Yeah.
what sires we're going to use.
Well, I think AJ Knowles might have pointed this out. You could make a show ring EPD. I mean, you could.
You
I
could.
guess if your phenotype was number of register of renown points or something like that. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I hate to
It'd
say
be
that
so
because
it'd be tough.
HBA
It's
will
gonna
do
happen.
that. Watch.
But
They
Oh,
forego a foot score and an udder
But he-
score, and they make a show EPD.
he also said just for fun he did it. He said it's scarily accurate. And
Really?
gosh.
Well, if you're kind of curious about how DNA and EPDs and genomics all work together, do listen back to our podcast with AJ, because I thought he did a fantastic job of putting it out to where anybody can understand it and kind of get something out of it.
Yeah, this kind of leads me to this stat that I have kept for 2 years. I hear in the chatter of people who are against DNA, one common thing I hear is people saying, well, why should I be forced to spend, $30 or whatever it is to DNA or parent verify my cattle because my word is good. I'm not going to lie, or they say, well, I only have natural calves, and so I'm not going to have a mistake or whatever, And 2 years ago at Brahman Days, Matt Spangler gave a great talk on this, and he presented some data that said sire misidentification has been very substantial in some populations, 7 to 10% in sheep, 10 to 13% in cattle. I'm going to quote this just so, Vischer, Perfield, and somebody else, Rahoot, in 2006. So they've got 2002, 2016, and 2006 data that says up to 10 to 13% of cattle can be wrongly identified as the sire. That's a lot.
I think it just so happens that I was listening to the Angus, one of the Angus podcasts yesterday, and they talked about this particular case study. And it wasn't they just selected 100 cows and tested this. They did the entire population in the Angus herd books from all the cattle registered in AAA, American Angus Association, from multiple countries. So it would have included all the cattle from the Canadian database, all the cattle from the North American database, including Mexico, Argentina, Australia. It's the entire deal. And that's the figure that they come up with, that 10 to 13% inaccuracy.
And the crazy thing is most of those people were trying to be pretty ethical, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
it was just accident.
Most people are ethical. So I was just saying, if you have 100 calves a year, that means 10 of them could be wrong.
That's right.
By accident. Or say if you're a small breeder that you have 20 calves a year, 2 of them are going to be wrong, potentially by accident. Well, what happens if, let's just say this scenario, if you're a small breeder, you have 20 calves a year, 2 of them are wrong, but the 2 that are wrong are your best show bull and your best show heifer that you take all across the USA getting show points, and maybe that one becomes an AI sire. Like, what's the impact of that? It's mind-blowing,
it could
honestly.
be extremely far-reaching. And
well,
say if you have a bull that turns into an AI sire and you sell 1,000 units of semen on them, resulting in 500 calves, that information
with the wrong parents,
that information is far-reaching. And just to show you how far-reaching, visiting with AJ and several of the other past performance guys there within the association, I asked them, okay, we register this many cows per year. Let's just use, for example, there's 11,000 Brahman cows registered each year in ABB. I said, of that 11,000, how many people turn in performance data at minimum birth weight? They said probably 1,500. And I said, of all the cattle registered, only 1,500? And they're like, yeah, that's about right. I said, okay, weaning weights. He said, you knock it down a little more. And so probably down to 700 or something like that. And then yearling weights, you can knock it down even more. Ultrasound data goes way down, and actual kill data. Well, if your bull sired 500 calves and all the data was collected on that skews the entire database.
That would mean 1,100 head a year in the ABBA, or the ABBA database could be incorrect. That's 1,100.
Think about the trickle down effect too, because data.
But they use all those EPDs to calculate the EPDs for the rest of the group.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
One thing about, so this is just 10% to 13% had a misidentified sire. So let's say you've got 20 cows, you keep the 2 females that were already identified wrong. So not only is the pedigree 10% of it's wrong coming from the sire, but then how many percentage is wrong from the females you kept that were inaccurately labeled and their pedigree was wrong?
It's mind-blowing.
Your whole breeding program could be false.
But is that, I mean, just look, you have this bull that you end up, say you got 10 calves just like it, and you had the 2 good ones. Well, based on those 2, you sell all that semen, and you're like, oh, he works the best on these kind of cows, and they buy a ton of semen, breed their whole herd to it. And everything is completely false. And it was your neighbor's bull that was 10 times better that jumped the fence and bred those 2 cows.
I listened to Angus Underground. Funny how much this conversation goes back to us listening to Angus Underground. They were talking about, like, and this is not a knock on anybody, but they were talking about some distaste towards hobby farmers because those people sell a bull to somebody under the preface that this is true seed stock, and they don't realize how much financial impact you could have on somebody's program selling them a bad bull. Yes. Maybe 6 years down the road, and they're calling daughters and realizing that they kept 50 females out of a bull that's going to sire curly-toed, balloon-teated, non-breeding heifers, and you just cost this guy hundreds of thousands of dollars on maybe his $7,500 herd bull investment.
That's the saddest thing I think about all the time. That's the worst thing about seed stock business. If you're buying from a seller with no integrity, like if you're buying from a seller who's just looking to make that quick buck, but you don't realize that could affect somebody's entire family. I mean, for 10 to 20 years. Yeah.
But even in a commercial setting, because right now we've been talking to people that are AI and embryoing and doing a lot of seed stock stuff.
Maybe worse.
Yeah, but say you have a bull sale. You have a bull buyer that has 100 cows, 200 cows, something like that, and they come by 4 to 8 bulls. But they're checking on EPDs, they're reading EPDs in this, and they have 2 different sire groups to pick from. And say they wean all their calves at weaning, and they send them on a big truck, and they send them off. Well, based on their EPDs, it shows this bull's calves should wean this much heavier than this bull's calves. Well, they want the heavier weaning stuff because that's how they market their cattle. So they go and buy 8 bulls to do that. They go and breed all their cows, and the difference in the 2 sire groups, when you start putting those calves together and putting them on trucks, could be thousands and thousands.
Could be hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, and then you start putting a dollar value to that, and especially in today's market where those calves could be bringing $2.50, $2.80 a pound. If the average of those entire loads are off by 20 pounds a head,
even worse. Think about
that's
those
a
people,
whole truckload.
People who decided to retain ownership and send some cattle to the feedlot based on carcass figures and carcass EPDs that are inaccurate and not correct, and then all of a sudden they go to sell those cattle on the grid because the cattle they bred on paper should be fantastic in terms of quality and yield grade, and then they end up no rolling or getting a bunch of selects or whatever, and you cost that family $250.
It might bankrupt the family.
If they sent 2 truckloads of calves, I mean, that could be $100,000 to $200,000 mistake.
Or again, think if that's a new breeder, someone who had just gotten into the Brahman breed and invested, a lot of money in building a herd based on what they thought the pedigrees they were getting, and then they found out it wasn't even that.
But that several things can happen in that. One, you bankrupt them; they're out of business. You never have that customer again. Okay, we'll add a few more. 2, whatever breed or breeder that they're using for their sire selection and sire use, they're never going to do that again. They're like, I'm not going back to that. That messed me up so bad. And then 3, you just ruined them your own reputation. So you're hurting yourself by not providing the accurate
not providing accurate DNA.
Yes.
You know that meme of that guy behind a chalkboard with all the figures and he's like talking and that's what you guys are right now. I wish people could see y'all because you're just talking with your hands and it's like you've got your brain is
wait,
going.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, but to tie, I know you may have some more, but I do want to tie this, since I'm Katie Couric here, tie this back to what we talked about earlier in the episode, the sire mismatch on 230. Because that really kind of goes back to what we were talking about. That bull this year, we sold, a lot of semen on that bull.
hundreds,
had it
if
not been
thousands.
identified and corrected, you would be in this exact situation. I mean, it wouldn't be as devastating, but that's a perfect example of how it happens.
Oh,
it can
it does.
happen, and you've got to fix it, and you've got to get your pedigrees accurate.
And I'm in the boat of DNA in every animal versus only embryo calves or only AI calves. Because just within our own program, when we do have mistakes, the biggest mistakes come out of the natural producing herd. Because now, yes, there can be several scenarios that affect everything. But one, in the natural calving situation, I've had bulls jump 2 pastures over to breed cows and then go back.
Yeah,
so,
they'd be hanging out, getting clothes. They're just
You
where
never
they're
knew.
supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, that happens all the time. Somebody jumps a cattle guard or you have a bullfight and you have 4 bulls tear through the fence, and then you got 4 bulls running with cows. And it seems to happen at a higher instance if you're not managing your breeding herds apart where they can't get together.
Yeah.
But even if you think you're getting together by putting a buffer zone, say 2 or 3 pastures apart, it happens. And then,
just for fun, did you?
I was just going to say on the ET and the AI side of things, it's also very easy to, when you're reaching in the semen tank to grab a straw of semen, to actually grab the wrong one. Or you grab the wrong cane. You've been pulling out of the same canister forever, and there's this cane of semen that's there, and you've been pulling it the whole time. Well, the next time you accidentally
muscle memory
pull one out of the wrong one. It happens.
Well, think about the time that Judd and Gayla had a calf that they registered by 160, thinking it was our 160. But then when the DNA came back, it was actually their 160. Same exact bull from just 2 different herds.
Mm-hmm.
And again, because I'll share this because they're like staunch DNA people. I think Heritage is also 100% DNA, and Gayla is a DNA whiz. She might rival you, Keaton.
We talk about it a lot. Bounce ideas off each other.
I mean, I don't know how often that occurs, but aren't there 2 bulls number 309? There's Elmo and Toby, and there was 2 160s and human error.
Yeah, it wasn't just 2 160s; it was 2 160s over
8. Yeah, they were both labeled 160 over 8.
And so, that's easy to do because how many of us will call it, just for an example, using 160 over 8, call up to the AI center on the day of fertilization, like, okay, I want to use 160 over 8 on our bull. What just so happens
you got
in
2,
our account, there's 2 different.
Yeah, you have both.
Yeah, we have both bulls.
That happens. I've even had it before where I'm in a hurry transferring semen from one to another, and I've got 1 straw of 1 bull that's just odd and random. And I was like, okay, I'll deal with this later. And you slip that 1 straw into another cane, and
then you never dealt with it.
You never come back. So yes, you pulled out of the right cane, but the wrong straw of semen is sitting in there.
My conspiracy question is, if you had to estimate how many prominent sires of the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s could be wrong, do you think?
What's your estimation?
I don't know, 10 to 13% based on
30%.
Vischer et al.
I'd triple it. Yeah.
I was going to say 30%.
You would say 30%.
Both knowingly and not knowingly. Because
you've had those conversations.
I've had those late night conversations. Yes.
Yeah, and you think it was even probably worse 30 years ago when there was no way of policing it. You think, my mind always goes back to old steer jocker fitter stories, and you hear
but that's not a registered animal. Not defending a steer jock, but that's not a pedigreed animal. We're selling pedigreed seed stock
that are breeding
and
stock.
That's all we have is their pedigree. It has to be accurate.
Yeah, I remember in that same conversation, I was asking about a very popular bull at the time. So you know what? As good as those females were that were sired by that bull and had such an impact, I'd a chance going back and breeding that bull today. And he said, you wouldn't want to. I said, why is that? He said, he ain't sired by what he said he's sired by. He's sired by a little bubble-headed thing they brought in from Mexico.
That's an interesting point, though, because a lot of people do feel like, hey, I might pull out of the tank this wool from the 70s.
Yeah. And I said, how do you know that? He said, I'm the one that imported
it. Conversations in Mississippi. Disclaimer, these did not happen in Texas.
Yeah, they did.
Okay, I don't know where they happened.
The technology was a little more advanced for the people in Mississippi than what they had in Texas.
Right.
Well, one thing, too, that I think at some point, and it's to that point, where there's legitimate litigations and wrongdoings that could ultimately affect you in a court of law by misrepresenting genetics, right? I mean, I would assume.
Oh yeah,
What was the Akaushi case?
Yeah, exactly. That's what it was
Yeah.
based
I
on, was
forgot
DNA
about
and things
that.
like that. And so, like,
It was based on what people paying a premium for certain pedigrees
that were supposed to be, because the way they have it, don't quote me on this, but I see it as there's like the original import animals, and people want genetics that are as close to when they came over versus stuff that's been bred, developed here. And so I think that maybe pedigree was wrong on some of those. I mean,
the legal ramifications of knowingly reporting incorrect pedigrees would be off the charts.
It could be upwards of
You're going
millions.
To be in federal prison.
Well, the election case was a 400. Was it a $400,000? Or was it
in
million?
the millions? I think.
But then 60 years ago.
Yeah, there's been people indicted over this kind of stuff through federal courthouse.
How much would you wouldn't know, but I think you're the Hereford expert. Like, how much was a straw of perfection semen? $20. I don't know. In our breed, we just sold the noble semen for $15,000 and the 160 semen for $13,000. Like, what if that wasn't what?
There would be some kickback.
There would be some problems.
And if someone sold me something that was misrepresented, I would have a big problem with it. I don't know if court's the way I would go, but it would definitely be an issue.
Yeah, big courts.
Depends on
the severity of the issue.
Severity of the deal.
So, what have we missed?
I don't know if we've missed anything. I do think we were pretty intense in the depth that we took into it, both from a parent verification. We went down the EPD route. We've somehow ended up in the courtrooms. So I'm trying to think, honestly, just kind of my wrap-up thoughts of all of it is, if you listen to this and you aren't on the boat that DNA is a positive, then I don't know if we're ever going to convince you. But I think as a whole, DNA is going to be a huge benefit for all of us moving forward. And I know it's a pain at times to collect the data, to collect the DNA, to submit it. You're waiting on it to get your cattle registered. And even myself, and knowing all the positives at times, I'm like, man, I just wish we'd have to do this. But at the end of the day, it's benefiting all of us.
Yeah,
you're protecting yourself and your customers. And if you don't do it, you're already getting left behind, because every relevant breed association in the world is doing it. And if you're going to be and have aspirations to be a relevant seed stock producer, you better get on board, or you're going to be left.
We want people to take Brahman seriously. This is non-debatable.
Yes. Yeah, and I also would say the moral is, if you're buying cattle, buy from people who do 100% DNA, 100% parent verification. Like, that's your quality assurance.
Goes without saying, really.
Yeah, that's the way you differentiate from people.
But I would say, as time goes on, yes, now we're collecting ours at branding, but I see us going forward, maybe starting to try to collect it at birth, just to get the accurate information earlier. And that way, every decision you make, you can make it at the earliest possible time to make the best genetic progress and make the best management decisions over time. Because who knows, say you send that stuff in at birth weight, at birth, and you get the information back by the time you're dehorning or this or that, you can keep cold decisions at that time and start sorting and say, his genomically enhanced EPDs come back and say he is not a birth weight, and it comes back red flag calculator. If it does that, that'd be awesome. But instead of wasting the $30 to dehorn him, kick him to the side and cut him.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah,
there's economic impacts at multiple levels here.
And so the earlier, the better. And like I said, as I see us going forward, I hope to move into collecting it at birth, the same time we're collecting birth weights and tagging those calves. We're already there doing it anyhow. If you get one of those taggers that tags it at the same time and takes the hole punch, man, that's easy peasy.
Slap in an IED and you can just do a one-stop shop.
I believe I'm going to have to go do a little Amazon shopping here just a little bit.
Didn't they say, this is a whole nother podcast, but didn't they say that new firm that bought out Digital Beef has some sort of surveillance system with their ear tags that they'll tell you when they're born, the exact birth date? They track the exact birth date. Did y'all read that?
How did they do that?
It's so mind-blowing. I can't think about it, but I get it sort of. They have an EID company. So when you tag it, with your EID, it gets in the system somehow, like through the satellites, and that's when they detect the day it arrives for a birth date, and that's how you're going to verify birthdays in the future.
But that's how, I mean, that's still
sense.
kind of up to the breeder, because, I might just wait that 3 months to put that
or put a different tag in.
But
I
think they're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, they're definitely.
There's something to be said about that. We don't even need to start on the aging conversation, because that could send us that's another podcast, but that is cool.
All right. Well, thanks so much for listening. Maybe last word, Keaton, if someone really finds this fascinating and they want to read more or learn more, where do they go?
Well, I mean, it depends on the depth that you wanted to go. You could Google Scholar and search some things from an academia level. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and if you want to listen to good podcasts that are very informative, there's a few Angus-based ones, and I always use the American Angus Association as kind of the gold standard, and I don't even own any Angus cattle, but I just appreciate the amount of science and the data that they can generate.
But you kind of do.
Yeah.
You kind of do own some Angus cattle.
Kind of a little bit, maybe. But I would say listen to podcasts. Go back and listen to our podcast that AJ did. I thought he did a fantastic job. And, go talk to some of the people that work for your breed association. You'd be surprised at how informed a lot of those people are.
I would, not to jump in just so I have the last word, but I would say for those on the fence about DNA, maybe because they're like, logistically it's just too hard or this or that. Yeah, we thought the same thing early on, but as we've got into it, it's almost second nature now. So, I mean, it's
just a normal part of
the process. Another day. Mm-hmm. So you get used to it.
All right. This was great. Thank you both. Thank you, Keaton and Brandon. And thanks for listening to Over the Hump.
You've been listening to the Over the Hump podcast. Our passion is Brahman cattle, and it runs deep. And this show is about its rich history, industry trends, and stories that define the American Brahman. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Instagram and Facebook at BR Cutrer. See you next time on the Over the Hump podcast.